Last fall, I went to the first concert of my life. I'm a female and in college, and at the time of the concert, I was a sophomore. I went with a few of my college friends who asked me to go with them. They couldn't believe I had never been to a concert before, and they were excited for me to go with. To be honest, I wasn't all that interested in going at first, but after my friends convinced me, I figured it would be a lot of fun. When we got there, it was at a basketball arena, but it was set up for the concert, and we had tickets that were really close, sort of up by the stage. I remember that a few hours in, the crowd was getting really into it, and my friends and I got up and started dancing. In the midst of all of this, something caught my eye. There was a guy standing there among the crowd wearing a really creepy mask. The mask covered his whole head, and it had a really exaggerated smile on it. The guy seemed to be locked onto me and staring right at me. Of course, there's a lot of wild people at concerts, and I wouldn't have cared at all aside from the fact that wherever I seemed to move, he would keep staring at me. I ignored it. I knew he was probably just some weirdo trying to scare people or annoy them. Several more times over the next hour or so, he caught my eye and was staring at me every single time, but he would be in different locations. This guy was creepy for sure, but I wasn't going to let him ruin my experience of going to my first ever concert. When it ended, it was late at night and everyone left. The venue was right in downtown of the city, and we parked several blocks away. It took like 20 minutes to walk back to the car that our friend Jordan had driven. When we finally got to the street that we had parked on, it was much quieter, and nobody else was really over there. We were walking down the street, and I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the guy in the mask again. Was it a coincidence that he was walking down this street, or was he following me? He was still staring, and when my friends saw me looking back, they looked as well. We all thought this guy was really creepy, how he was right behind us, staring at me. The guy was like 40 feet back, and when we went forward, he would do the same, but when we stood still, he did the same thing as well. My friends and I asked the guy what he wanted, but he didn't answer and instead just kept staring. We kept walking and eventually made it back to our car. As we were about to get inside, a car pulled up on the street out of nowhere and stopped right next to the guy in the mask. He got inside of it, and then the car parked behind us a ways down the street. We sat there and waited because we were afraid the car was going to follow us. We both sat there for probably about 10 minutes, I would say, and eventually the other car just pulled away and left. This story happened just a couple of months ago. It was summertime, and I went to a music festival with my friend Robin one Friday. It was a pretty large event, and they had all kinds of performers on different stages around the area. It was in a sort of big park in the city, and after getting there, we went to several different stages and went all around the whole venue. We spent a decent amount of time at a few different stages, and by the time we went home, it was around midnight. Where the story really starts, though, is the next day. When I woke up in the morning, I saw that I had several missed calls and voicemails on my phone from a number that I did not recognize. It seemed really strange, and I decided to play the messages. At first, I couldn't make them out at all, and I had no idea what was going on. I thought somebody must have called me by complete accident, but the fact that there were 4 messages seemed odd. After playing the messages again, I was putting my phone right up to my ear, and I was able to make out music in the background. I could hear crowd noise as well as music, and I realized that the music playing was the same music as the performers I had seen the night before. There were 5 messages, and each message was from a song that I had heard, but 3 of them were at completely different stages. The crazy thing is, they were each stages that I had been to when songs were played that I had also been to. I found this really freaky, and I had to tell Robin all about it. I hadn't given my number to anybody who was there, so this was just really bizarre. All of the phone calls had taken place between 5 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. when I was asleep. I just didn't know how to explain it, but I did my best to just shrug it off. It was that night when I was by myself watching a movie in my bedroom when I received another phone call. It was about 11 p.m. and I thought about answering the call, but ultimately decided not to because I was too nervous. I had no idea who this was that was calling, and I didn't know what I would say or anything like that. I let it go to voicemail, and whoever it was left another one. I was nervous and waited a few minutes, but then I played it, expecting to maybe hear another song, but instead I heard something else. I put it up to my ear once again, and it was quieter this time, but it sounded like a movie. Then I realized what it was. It was the same movie I was watching. I remembered that my bedroom window was open. It was summer, so I'd have it open a lot at night. I looked over, but thankfully nobody was there when I looked. It was sort of behind me and out of my vision, so I ran, closed it immediately. I didn't know if the guy was still on my property somewhere, but I didn't want to stay there and find out, so I called my parents and told them about it, and then left my house and drove all the way to my parents' house, 15 minutes away, and spent the night there. There was absolutely no chance I was going to stay in my house that night. I spent a few nights back at my parents', and we went back to my place to look around a few times, but since then, there has been nothing. I'm hoping whoever it is never bothers me again. Back when I was a kid, my older sister played the piano, and I remember that she was pretty good at it. I used to get dragged to all of her concerts that she would perform in with a bunch of other kids. One time, I was probably like 7 years old, maybe 8, and we went to this one high school to see her perform. It was another concert, and I didn't find these concerts particularly interesting, but sometimes they could be fun. I went with my parents, and we sat in the theater area of the school. There was probably a few hundred people there, and it was like a 2-hour-long concert. At the halfway point, they had an intermission where you could leave the theater and get food and snacks down the hall in the cafeteria. I went there with my parents during the intermission on this night. While we were there, my parents started to talk to some of the other parents that they were friends with there. My dad gave me some money to buy some food if I wanted. They had the pretty typical things that you could get at like basketball games or things like that. I went over and got some Skittles, and I remember shortly after I got them, I was still at the far end of the cafeteria when this guy just randomly tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and he started talking to me, saying how he figured I was bored at this concert. I told him yeah, I was, and then the guy asked if I wanted to go with him and play video games. I said no because it just seemed weird to me. He told me his car was right outside and pointed to the door of the cafeteria, which was actually one of the back doors of the school and not where most people parked. He asked me several more times like he really wanted me to go with him, but I just kept saying no. Eventually, he gave up and left. I just went back to my parents after that. I'm sure nothing seemed suspicious or out of the ordinary to anyone there. It honestly wasn't until years later that I realized the guy might have been trying to kidnap me and how serious that really was. I didn't even realize how weird or suspicious it sounded with the things that the guy was saying, but I sure am glad that I said no to him.